I've been preaching since the age of 15 and have been preaching for more than 35 years already. So you can guess what my age is right now. In all these years of preaching, especially the earlier days of preaching, I must admit that I loved the spotlight. I loved it when people called me to preach, when people asked me to say something. I used to get excited. I wanted it. I longed for it. I would pray for it. And I would be so excited to be on the stage behind the pulpit to preach and to hear the applause of people, to hear their affirmation, their amen, and to see people standing up to give their hearts to God and surrender their lives to Him used to bring me such great joy. Now that I've been preaching for more than 35 years, I realized that while I enjoyed it, while it was exciting, my desire and love for preaching was quite ego-driven. I think I'm at the age now where I can admit that I have not been so humble in living out this calling that God has placed on my life. I'm not saying that I did it with insincerity. No, my entire being, my heart and soul was in it when I was preaching. But I also realized that there was a tinge of ego and pride in what I did. I longed for the spotlight. I loved being in front of people. I believed for a long time that I was born for the stage, and I still do. I believe that this is a gift that God has given me. It's not something that I just learned in university. It's a gift that God has placed upon my life. It's a calling that He has anointed me with. Yes, I strongly believe that. In the year 2012, I had published a book called Revolutionary Preaching in a Secular World. And this book, while it was published in 2012, I did not spend a lot of my time speaking about it because I was so busy preaching that I had neglected a special leaning and that God was calling me into, and that was teaching how to preach. When I wrote this book, Revolutionary Preaching in a Secular World, I did my research, and my research showed a fact. And the fact was that every Sabbath, lay people, especially in Southern Africa alone, preach more than 20,000 sermons in local churches. The ordained pastors preach less than 8% of the total number of sermons in local churches in any given week. And of the total number of preachers, less than 7% received formal training. That's a fact. The logical conclusion of this was, and I'm reading from the back of the book, preaching is not the exclusive domain of the clergy anymore. While the quantity of preachers increase, and it should, we need to be vigilant to ensure that the quality of preaching is not compromised. To bridge the gap between the classroom and the pulpit is the intention of revolutionary preaching in a secular world. I believe that preaching, communicating the gospel, is indispensable to Christianity. For without it, a necessary part of its authenticity would be lost. Therefore, it is imperative that the integrity of this high calling is preserved. However, the call to preach is more than a call to simply proclaim a message. It is a call to live and give evidence of the power of the gospel. Before we can call others to be what Christ wants them to be, they must see that we have already become what we preach, a transformed life by the power of God. The world is waiting not for a new definition of the gospel, but for a new demonstration of the power of the gospel. Now, revolutionary preaching in a secular world blends three dimensions of the communication map, MAP, that is the message, the audience, and the preacher, into a single, insightful, crisp, and relevant approach, making it significant for every preacher. That's what's written at the back of this book, among other things. And for a long time, I spent my energy and my time preaching the gospel, which I still do. And I love it. I love every moment and opportunity I get to stand before people and present to them biblical truths and introduce them to Christ, in whom all truth is enmeshed and centered in. Now that I am over 50, I'm beginning to have a different feeling, a different sense about my calling to preach the gospel. I am now beginning to realize that a greater joy is in seeing others do what you have been doing for a long time, but them doing it better and bigger. And then we celebrate that. I begin to realize now at this stage of my life that I am experiencing greater joy in seeing others preach, especially those whom I have coached, whom I have groomed, who have done my preaching course or have read the book Revolutionary Preaching. And I realize that this is what God is calling me into. So previously, for 35 years, since the age of 15, I was actually the hero on the stage. Now that I'm past 50, I want to be, my desire is not to be the hero of this story anymore. I would really like to be the guide and the coach in this story. God is leading me towards teaching others how to preach. And that's what I have been doing for the past few years, maybe 4 or 5 years already, teaching people how to preach. I've been conducting workshops, preaching workshops in India, in America, in Kenya, most recently in Kenya, in South Africa. And these preaching workshops have been designed to help young preachers, seasoned preachers, ordained pastors, and students who want to build their capacity and sharpen the skill of preaching. That is the purpose of these workshops, and it is based on the book Revolutionary Preaching in a Secular World. Out of interest, we developed a full preaching coaching program on this book Revolutionary Preaching in a Secular World. It's an online program, an online course based on this book, so that more people anywhere, everywhere can access this course without any added expense of going to the classroom and taking time out in order to learn how to sharpen the skill of preaching. At first, I used to give lectures on how to preach. Then I conducted some seminars on preaching. But recently, for the past year, especially my experience in Kenya recently, and I'm going to show you a clip of how powerful it is to conduct a workshop rather than giving a lecture from an experience in Kenya. Just wait for it. In Kenya, I realized that conducting workshops is more effective and has a greater impact. That's what I decided to do. Instead of giving lectures or conducting seminars, which I would do on rare occasions, I would prefer conducting workshops on preaching so that more people can be better skilled at preaching. I want you to listen to what is the difference. A lecture is a formal presentation. Listen, formal presentation conducted by a lecturer. Tutorials, on the other hand, are smaller classes which allow discussion of the lecture content and assignments. You can ask questions and clarify what you have studied. Tutorials are most often limited to formal studies. Workshops, however, involve authors like myself, involves experts in subjects, presenting themes or concepts that are related to a program or an idea. Workshops are usually more hands-on learning. Get it? Hands-on learning that allow discussion regarding a given topic. Seminars, on the other hand, tend to be more academic in nature, focusing on lectures and discussion, while workshops is more hands-on with a focus on skill building, capacity building, and practice. And that is why I have decided to spend the next few years of my life teaching people how to preach within a workshop setting, because it's more capacity building, it's more skill development, and it is more hands-on, and that is what I want to do. So, just to illustrate, if this pencil represents my life, and I've been using this end of the pencil for so long, and that is preaching. I want this pencil to represent, this half of the pencil rather, to represent the preaching that I have been doing. So I've been preaching for a number of years, 35 years to be precise, and I realized that the time has come when I should reflect upon the impact that I am having. And when I did that, I realized that instead of simply preaching, why don't I use the other portion of my life to do what needs to be done? And that is, instead of just preaching, which is this side, why don't I also teach to preach? You get it? Teach to preach. So here I want to do now for the next maybe 25 years, I hope, of my life, teach how to preach. Yes, I would preach now and again. I would still preach. Of course, I love to preach. I want to share the truths of the Bible. I want to explain truths from the Bible. I want to introduce people to Christ. Yes, I will still preach. But the next 25 years of my life, I would really like to teach how to preach. So I want to interchange between preaching and teaching how to preach, with an emphasis and more emphasis on teaching how to preach rather than just preaching. I'm glad for the maturity that I am entering into, and that is not just wanting to be the hero in the story, but also to be the guide and the coach of the story. And when I receive invitations to conduct preaching workshops around the world, I am super excited. I am energized. Just in this year, we conducted workshops in India, I think in 3 states in India, especially in the city of Bangalore, where all the pastors, the local pastors of the city came together with the elders and young people who wanted to learn how to preach. It was an awesome meeting. And then most recently in Kenya, where a group of people, young people, professors, government officials, pastors, and just young people came together and said, we love to preach, we want to preach, but we don't know how. And for those who knew how, they wanted to know how to sharpen the skill and be better at it. And that's what I decided to do with the next maybe 1/3 of my life, next third of my life. And I am praying that those who engage in this program, Revolutionary Preaching in a Secular World, I am praying that they would become great preachers who would do much more than myself and others before me or behind me. It is such a privilege and a joy to impact the next generation and current generation of preachers, so that the level, the quality of preaching can be higher. And instead of me just preaching now to 1,000 people, I've preached to people in small groups, in a group of 12 to 15. I've preached in classroom. I've preached in university halls. I've given lectures in university. I've preached in stadiums with 70 to 100,000 people. I know what it is to preach to 10 or 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people at one time. I've experienced the thrill of it. But there comes a time in one's life where we have to make a more meaningful contribution to the generation behind you and with you. And that's what I want to do. I want to help preachers become better preachers. I want to help increase the quality of preaching. And you can be a part of this. You can simply say, Paul, I want to help host a preaching workshop, or I would like to invest in you conducting a preaching workshop. You can be part of it in so many ways, and I want to invite you so that it's not just mine, but it's our journey. Let's impact the world. Let's impact the quality of preaching. Let's influence the preachers who are preaching today, because clearly, more than, according to the facts that I've studied and researched, more than 90% of our preaching is done by lay people who have not gone to university to study how to preach, but they preach from their compulsion and the excitement of what Christ has done for them. And that is so amazing just on its own. But can you imagine the impact we would have if this 90% of preachers were empowered, were skilled, where their capacity was built and improved? Can you imagine how much this impact would be? I can't. Just to think about it. I used to get excited when I preached to 1,000 people, and I used to long for it. But now my thrill is not to preach to 1,000 people. I still want to, but my greater desire and need, maybe it comes with age, I don't know. Maybe it comes with experience, or maybe I am finally growing up from a teenager to an adult. I don't know. But I think that if we truly want to make an impact, can you imagine a greater impact than mobilizing 1,000 people to preach? That's what I want to do. I don't want to preach to 1,000 people anymore as much as I used to want it before. I want to train 1,000 people to preach. I don't want to preach to a crowd of 100,000 anymore. I'd love to still do that. But I would really love to train 100,000 preachers. Because 100,000 preachers who preach just to 10 people, that would be reaching 1 million people. That which I could not do in 35 years, I believe can be done in 35 days. If I just, instead of preaching, if I would preach less and teach how to preach, I think more would be accomplished. And I want to thank you for being part of this journey. And I want to invite you to play a greater role in impacting the world. Not just to get 1,000 people together. Let's train 1,000 people. Let's build the capacity of 100,000 preachers. That's the new vision. I invite you. I ask you to be part of it. May God bless you and thank you for your partnership.